Want to know what's going on in Birmingham and across the globe? Visit us online at unityfm.net for the latest information.
Welcome back. You're listening to Lockdown with me, Ahmed Bostan, here on 93.5 FM, Unity FM across Birmingham and surrounding areas, and online, www.unityfm.net. This is the program that brings you the very latest on the lockdown. Some very, very saddening figures, as we mentioned earlier in the program. 30,000 people are now known to have passed away as a result of the coronavirus here in Britain, leading to Britain becoming the country in Europe that has the largest death toll so far. A very, very, very saddening reality indeed. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson is due to make an announcement, a speech, an address to the nation coming on this Sunday. We await, of course, what developments that particular statement brings in terms of all of our lives. Will it lead to some measures being relaxed? Will it lead to some adjustments to the lockdown? We'll find out come Sunday. But an inevitable consequence of the situation we are in by way of coronavirus and the subsequent lockdown is the impact this is having on charities and community groups. This is, of course, the blessed month of Ramadan, in which people are very generous in giving to organizations. But many charities, including those in the Muslim sector, have expressed concern over how willing people will be to give to charitable causes at this time when people's own jobs and careers are under huge uncertainty, with question marks over many people's employment. The furlough scheme, for example, being used on a huge level. I'm delighted to say, to talk about this further, joining me now, I have brother Nasir Rafiq. Nasir Rafiq is a chartered accountant. He specializes in matters concerning charities. He has written in the mainstream journals on this particular subject, and he's on our program with us. Assalamu alaikum, brother Nasir Rafiq. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for joining us on Unity FM Lockdown with Ahmed Bostan.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me.
Wa alaikum salam. What does this mean, Brother Nasir, this lockdown, the coronavirus pandemic, for community groups, charities, and also our masajid across Birmingham and the surrounding areas?
Well, it is very serious. The mainstream media has reported that the charity sector, the mainstream charity sector in UK, will lose around £4 billion in a 12-week period. And just today, the Third Sector magazine has reported that Bond, which is the umbrella body for the development charities, 40% of the charities are at risk in closing down during the next 6 months. This is how serious the matter is for the mainstream charity sector. Now, for the Muslim charity sector, so the biggest charities are the charities that work in the development sector. So they raise money from UK and they spend money abroad. So I recently did as this crisis started, I analysed 20 large charities, and I've written an article in my blog, duathoughts.com, where I analysed the financial health of these charities to see what kind of issues they'll face. Now, I'm estimating that during the month of Ramadan, potentially these charities can lose 50% of their target income. They're not doing any events. They basically are not able to go to mosques. And this will have an impact that their annual income can drop by 20%. Now, what you need to be mindful of is that they basically spent their money 3 months in advance preparing for Ramadan. Now, if the money's not going to come into Ramadan, suddenly they've got a hole in their accounts. Now, this is going to have these 20 charities employ 1,300 people. Now, this will mean, job losses. This could mean all sorts of cost-cutting initiatives. Now, when it comes to mosques, 75% of the mosque income depends on Friday collections and evening school fees. Now, mosques have been closed since 13th of March. Now, there hasn't been any Friday collection. There hasn't been any, fees of a madrasa. So these mosques are really cash-stripped at the moment. So we are looking at quite a serious crisis when it comes to the Muslim sector, and it's made worse in some ways because of lockdown being during the month of Ramadan, because everybody gears up for Ramadan to collect their funds because of sadaqah, zakat, and the reward that comes during Ramadan. So, 50 to 60, 40% of the developing charity income is raised during Ramadan. And mosques, if you look at a lot of the construction projects, all of them, the money is raised during the month of Ramadan. So this is going to have a longer impact on mosques, constructions going forward. So the picture doesn't look very good at the moment. It is pretty bad.
In terms of any government support that has been put out there, what is that support, and have you found charities and mosques are getting it or are applying for it?
Yeah, I sit in the MCB's economic response group that they've set up because of this crisis, and they asked me to write a strategy for them. And I went through all areas that concern the Muslim sector, so mosques, like the developing charities, the community groups, halal businesses, owner-managed businesses, employment, Hajj and Umrah outlets as well. Now, the government support there, I assess government support against each of the sectors. It's not enough at all. I'll give you a mosque, for example. 50% of the mosque expenditure is normally salaries. Now, suddenly the mosques are closed. Now, the government is saying, we'll give you 80% of the people that have been furloughed. First of all, it's sometimes very difficult to furlough a imam, because to have somebody furlough, the condition is that person must not work. Now, it's Ramadan. How can we not have the imam not work? The imam will do as a minimum the sermons online. Now, because of that, he becomes ineligible for furlough grant. Now, suddenly that's a cost that the mosque has to bear. Now, 80% is being funded by the government. Now, we already know that mosques, they don't pay high salaries. People are mostly on minimum salary or just above minimum salary. Now, you're going to pay 80% of that salary. Now, that's not enough for the people that are working for the mosques. And then again, there's a timing issue. That money, you have to apply for that money, and sometimes there's a month lag. And now, when it comes to developing charities, the likes of the big names that we have that raise money from UK. Now, these are fundraising times. Now, you can't furlough your fundraising staff. Now, you can't furlough your finance staff. You can't furlough sometimes your program staff because of a coronavirus crisis globally. There are food packs and all sorts of things going on. But suddenly they're stuck. They can't furlough staff, so they can't apply for that grant. Now, the only grant that they can get is from local government, that £10,000 or £25,000, depending on your size of the building that you use. Now, is that enough to cover 2-3 months of expenditure? Not really. Now, the only thing that's really left is the bank loans. Now, we already know that the banks are making it harder and harder for businesses, never mind for charities. I recently attended a meeting with people who actually sit in committees with banks and with the Treasury, and they made it clear that the charities can apply for that loan. But myself, with the experience that I have, when you take a business plan to a bank that says charity on it, that's not going to be on their top priority. So it is looking very, very difficult. Now, that doesn't mean that charities won't be able to get loan, but in order to make that business case, it has to be very robust and convincing. And what that basically means is that you have to be a viable charity before the lockdown, and that the money that the bank's going to give you is going to make you more viable so they can share the benefit with the bank as well. Now, how will the charities show that? This is where the challenge will be.
And I guess the difficulty, Nasir Rafiq, in this situation is that when people are facing a huge amount of uncertainty with their own jobs, British Airways announcing over 12,000 people losing their employment, just to give one example, others hugely affected by the situation we are in. If people are struggling to provide themselves and their family with what they need, then giving to charity as much as they love to do it and want to do it, simply they won't be able to do it. And I guess that would also affect the ability of charities to be able to weather this storm and move through this. You're the former Director of Finance of Islamic Relief. You've very much been at the top level of the Muslim charity sector with some of the largest Muslim charities around that do a huge amount at home and abroad to support vulnerable communities. Finally, Nasir Rafiq, what do you see in the long term as being the consequence of this, not only for the organizations themselves, as you say, will have their income depleted, but also the vulnerable beneficiaries that they serve at home and abroad?
You know, I wrote an article on this, and it's titled Ramadan Lockdown and the Impact on the UK Muslim Charity Sector. And, you know, your listeners can find that on duathoughts.com website. In that, I analysed this. I mean, 20 Muslim charities, you know, I estimated that every year they distribute millions of food packs, hundreds and thousands of qurbanis, and they sponsor regularly, more than 100,000 orphans. Now, with this crisis, what's going to happen is that they have to tighten their belt. They will have less money to distribute. So beneficiaries on the ground will actually suffer. There are orphans that rely on your monthly direct debit. Now, the seasonal distributions that happen during Ramadan and during Qurbani time, these are huge expenditure categories for Muslim charities. Well, when that reduces, that spend in the world will reduce as well. And what you have to understand is that these 20 charities spend money in the most deprived areas of the world. I mean, where people basically sometimes die of hunger, sometimes don't get enough to eat, malnutrition. Water is a big issue. Suddenly, all those projects, will be either delayed or be put on hold. There are people that literally will die as a result of this. Now, at home in UK, as I said, there are 1,300 people that are on payroll of 20 charities. Now, that doesn't include the self-employed people who work within charities. So the actual figure that people rely on charities on is much higher. Now, these charities will have to reduce their costs. This will eventually mean that people will lose their jobs. So there will be livelihoods in UK that will be at risk. So now the thing is, in a situation like this, in a crisis like this, the charities will need to be more intelligent. When it used to be heydays when, there used to be a lot of money coming in, a lot of money being spent, budgets, were not a consideration. Cost cutting was not a consideration. Value for money was not a consideration. Choosing between fundraising cost or program cost was not a consideration. How much you're paying your partners abroad, that wasn't a consideration. Now, in order to do this properly and to be fair with beneficiaries, trustees and charity management will have to work intelligently. They will have to get the systems and processes in place. They will have to get budgets in place. Indeed. And they will have to improve their governance significantly for the sake of beneficiaries in order to ensure that they continue the work that they do abroad.
Indeed. Nasir Rafiq, challenging times indeed. And the example you shared earlier, I think, of the mosques and how an imam cannot be furloughed in Ramadan is a very, very appropriate one. I imagine that the Muslim Council of Britain and others are making representation to the government on such issues, especially at the time we find coronavirus affecting and unfortunately infecting many people here in the United Kingdom. Jazakallah khair for joining us on Unity FM. Really appreciate your time this evening.
Jazakallah. Thank you for having me.